Welcome back to Rhody Beat Report. I'm Justin Theria, joined by Alexa Baker and Emily Lanzarone. We have a great episode ahead for all of you. We're going to look at how the Rams secured their 8th win of the season, a pretty historic mark for this program. We're going to have our game reaction and analysis. We're going to take a look at the FCS playoff picture, as well as give you a breakdown of the Delaware Fightin' Blue Hens. And stay tuned, as we're only getting started here at the Rhody Beat Report.
This past week, the Rhode Island Rams took down one of the most prolific FCF offenses in Monmouth in what was yet another electric comeback win for the Rams. Starting out with the first quarter, right towards the end, the Hawks running back Sona Toe scored a 7-yard rushing touchdown to take a 7-0 lead over the Rams. With 4:25 left, the Rams tie the game with a 28-yard receiving touchdown from receiver Marquise Buchanan, who had an unbelievable game. And running back Dion Silas had a 22-yard carry before a 16-yard carry by quarterback Devin Farrell to spark the drive early. With 33 seconds left, the Hawks close out the quarter with a 4-yard receiving touchdown by Jack Neri to take a 14-7 lead entering the second quarter. Now into the second quarter, Rhody kicker Ty Groff tacks on another 3 with a 29-yard field goal to make it 14-10 Monmouth. And with 3:09 left, Monmouth's Natoa scored his 20th rushing touchdown of the season with a 2-yard carry to give the Hawks a 21-10 lead. And then with 1:54 left, Rhody struck one more time before the half as Farrell found none other than Tommy Smith for a 29-yard touchdown to make it 21-17 Monmouth going into halftime. Now entering the third quarter, the Hawks extended their lead out of the break with an 11-yard receiving touchdown from Trey Neal, making it a 28-17 ball game. And then with 1:44 left, the Rams weren't done though, as running back Malik Grant continued his tear with a 16-yard rushing touchdown to make it a 28-24 game entering the fourth quarter. And now entering the fourth quarter, Rhode Island finally broke through to take their first lead of the game thanks to a clutch 24-yard touchdown from Farrell to Buchanan, giving the Rams a 31-28 lead. And now a fumble on the Hawks' lateral attempts recovered by cornerback Frederick Millay returned for a touchdown as time expired to make the final score 37-28 with an electric end to the game.
It was really electric. I mean, kind of a meaningless touchdown, but helps the point differential.
Helps the energy.
Yeah.
It was electric for sure.
Maybe somebody's parlay, maybe an over-under, but
exactly.
Outside of that, it was definitely just kind of a feel-good cherry on top moment, especially for the Rhode Island native, Frederick Millay. And like I said, with the playoffs coming up, with all the metrics and whatnot that are going into this year's playoff committee's decision, and a lot has been made about what they're going to use to determine that, the KPI, all of that. You never know when an extra 7 is going to really be beneficial for your team down the road. So overall, it was a great win for the Rams, but that final touchdown, I don't know how much it really meant.
It was crazy. The Rams' defense bent but did not break. Monmouth did have 33 rush attempts for 69 rushing yards, averaging merely 2.1 yards per carry, and the Hawks did finish the day with a total of 335 total yards on offense and 4.4 yards per play, 2.3 yards per play fewer than the Rams. Monmouth ended the game 6 for 14 on third down with under half the game's worth of time of possession. There were some standouts on defense this week, some big sacks from youngsters Case Makins and Moses Muse, as well as outside linebacker AJ Pena. He had a total of 7 tackles, 2.5 tackles for a loss, and a fumble recovery on a momentum swing fumble by Monmouth's quarterback with under 2 minutes to go, which was a huge play. Cornerback Frederick Millay also had 8 total tackles, 1 pass breakup, and a fumble recovery for a touchdown.
Yeah, a lot of great impact plays from those guys, but they've been doing that all season, so not much of a surprise there. But how about on the offensive side of the ball? There was a couple of miscues, right? We saw Devin Farrell continues to turn the ball over, some pretty awful interceptions early on in this one, but not a whole ton of punts, although the Rams' offense did sort of struggle earlier in the game. But Devin Farrell, overall, a pretty great game outside those 2 interceptions. He 20 for 25 is a great completion percentage, 265 yards, so he matched the prolific quarterback Derek Robertson on the other side for Monmouth. He had 3 passing touchdowns on the day. He had 11 carries for 40 yards, so he continues to get it done on the ground. Malik Grant also continuing to have a fantastic season for Rhode Island. Another 100-yard performance for him, this time with 25 carries for 126 yards. Eventually got in the end zone on that 16-yard carry that you talked about. That one ended with some emphatic running through the shoulder pads of defenders. It was a really great run to watch. And Deion Silas continues to perform well. The Iowa State transfer, now in his second year, 11 carries, 56 yards. Marquise Buchanan, a preseason all-conference receiver, a Rhode Island native coming out of Classical High School. I think a lot of people expected a little bit more from him this season. It's been a slow start, but in the last couple of weeks, he's really turned it on. Today was easily probably the best game of his career, maybe definitely the best game of the season. 12 receptions, 171 yards, 2 touchdowns. Just a fantastic performance from him. In the last couple of weeks, that Buchanan to Farrell connection has just been absolutely electric. The offensive line continues to build a brick wall. This week it was a little bit weaker, 2 sacks allowed, but obviously before that we talked a lot about how they had gone a whole month without allowing any sacks. So just 2 in one game, especially a game against an opponent of Monmouth's caliber, it's acceptable. Guards Jordan Cooper, Thomas Buxton were rock solid in pass protection, and they're on either side of center. Trey Alexander and Buxton did allow a sack, but like I said, we'll give them a pass this week. They've been so fantastic this season. Tackles Brock Betha and Jacob Otts didn't have the best games, allowing a combined 5 quarterback pressures, but it can be really difficult to play those tackle positions, especially at the collegiate level. So improvement on blocking from the tight ends and on the outside, as well as the receivers, was pretty noticeable this week. That downfield blocking was huge, especially on that Malik Grant touchdown run. Whenever you see those long runs, especially at the college level, you always have to remember to thank your wide receivers and tight ends, because they're the ones that are 15, 20 yards downfield making that play happen. So overall, a pretty great physical performance from the Rhode Island offense, the blockers, everybody involved. Wasn't perfect, but they got the job done and ended up with 37 points. So can't really complain in a great win over the Monmouth Hawks.
Not gonna lie, that offense did scare me a little bit in the first half. I was getting nervous. But as this team does, they pulled through, and I'm glad that it ended the way that it did.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You could say it was a slow start. It was definitely scary to watch, and I think that at a certain point when you're watching this one, and we think about doing this show, and we think about what am I going to have to say when I talk. At one point I thought I was going to have to get up here and say that you can't make mistakes like those red zone interceptions or the Sean Harris turnover on the end around. Those aren't mistakes that you're allowed to make against a team as great as Monmouth. But Rhode Island, you could say they were lucky to get away with those, and it's a good learning experience, because now you have Delaware and UAlbany coming up, and those are, objectively better teams, and those games are just as important as this one was in terms of Rhode Island's playoff hopes. So you live and you learn, you get away with some mistakes, and hopefully going forward, Rhode Island, is able to prevent them going forward.
This is Kyle with Rhody Football Front Office, and I'm here to talk about the trends to watch so far with the team. Being an 8-1 team, there's always going to be a lot of trends to watch, and that's going to start at the top with the quarterback. The development of Devin Farrell's confidence as a passer has eliminated turnovers and shown that he's not just the guy for now, but also going forward. Running back Deion Silas has emerged as a true change of pace option with big playability behind Malik Grant, and wide receiver Tommy Smith has been solidifying himself as Farrell's go-to safety valve. Receiver drops have continued to be a problem, but they're slowly improving week by week. And offensive line Jordan Cooper's physicality adds a notable element at the offensive line at guard or tackle. The defensive line rotation is seeing an uptick in play from young players Case Mankins and Kareem Wilson Jr., and linebacker Moses Muse is seeing the field more in situational roles. The pass rush is getting to the quarterback more, particularly A.J. Pena and Carson Primrose, but inconsistencies remain at the second level in coverage underneath, and the team continues to have its up and downs with wrap-up and fundamental tackling. The return game looks like it's getting closer by the week to having a real breakthrough, but the protection in the kicking game remains something to monitor, with 2 blocked field goals this season.
Now it's time for the fun part about being a highly ranked team with playoff aspirations. It's important that we keep an eye on the rest of the nation and see what's going on ahead of Rhode Island, right? Because if any of those teams drop, Rhode Island has a chance to drop into the top 8, get a first-round bye, likely host a playoff game. So why don't we look ahead and see who's ahead of Rhode Island in these polls? So it starts with, of course, North Dakota State. FCS football runs through the Dakotas. Montana State as well, South Dakota State. UC Davis, another one of those programs trying to make the jump to FBS. We have South Dakota, Southeast Missouri State, Montana, Incarnate Word, Idaho, Mercer. All of these schools are ahead of Rhode Island and are all likely to host a playoff game or get a first-round bye. In the coaches poll, of course, once again, North Dakota State leading the way at 1, Montana State, South Dakota State, UC Davis, that's your top 4. South Dakota, Southeast Missouri State, Montana, Incarnate Word, and Richmond are all ahead of Rhode Island. The only one that sort of surprises me right there is Richmond, although I think by the end of the season, voters will be decided which one of these two CAA teams, Rhode Island or Richmond, are better.
Montana State is the lone undefeated team in the FCS. North Dakota State, UC Davis, Southeast Missouri State, Mercer, and Rhode Island are the teams with 1 loss. South Dakota State, South Dakota, Montana, Incarnate Word, and Richmond each have 2 losses. All right, and now going into how the FCS playoffs are going to work a little bit. The 10 conference champions receive automatic bids. The best 14 teams selected by D1 Football Championship Committee are, receive at-large bids. The top 8 teams are seeded with a first-round bye and guaranteed home game, and conference championship does not guarantee home field advantage for this FCS.
So moving forward, there are some notable games. Going into Week 11, UC Davis will be playing at Montana, and that will be a top 10 battle, as well as Incarnate Word. They will be hosting Lamar. South Dakota State will be playing at North Dakota, which will be a huge game. And then moving on to Week 12, we do have Mercer at Alabama, South Dakota at North Dakota, Incarnate Word at Stephen F. Austin, Missouri State at North Dakota State, and Montana State at UC Davis. And then as the regular season ends for Week 13, we do have Montana at Montana State, an in-state battle. That will be an interesting one. North Dakota State at South Dakota, and South Dakota State at Missouri State.
Lots of states, lots of Dakotas.
Lots of states.
I think that's my favorite part so far this season about being such a highly ranked team with so much playoff aspirations is Rhode Island fans truly get a chance to kind of take a look at what the FCS landscape looks like. And this year, you really are. Rhode Island actually is relevant to these Dakota schools and these Montana schools where
the 4 Dakota schools?
There is 4 of them, right?
4 schools in the Dakotas. Who would have thought?
I can't remember all of them, but I know it's the Bison. I know it's the Jackrabbits. I know it's the Hawks. And I can't, for the life of me, remember South Dakota. I'm trying to remember.
Well, it's probably something crazy.
I know it's got a paw. Does anyone in here know?
I didn't even know that there were 4 schools in North and South Dakota, so
You've
no.
got nothing from me.
So
I can give you 3 or 4, but I can't remember the...
We'll have to Google that later.
We'll Google it later. Also, Roll Tide.
Oh, my... Yeah, Mercer... Well, Mercer's not going to be punished for that game. And I hope that they're getting at least $1 million to go play Alabama.
Yeah. Roll Tide.
Are you being serious? Roll Tide?
No, just Roll Tide. I don't know.
You heard it, Roll Tide.
Want to support the potentially historic 2024 Rhode Island Rams football team? Purchase tickets for the regular season home finale and senior day against UAlbany on Saturday, November 16th, now as it will likely sell out. Student tickets will go on sale Thursday, November 16th. Bring the Rhody Ruckus and help make Meade Stadium the best home field advantage and the best place to play in the entire CAA. As the Rams have a chance to chase one of the best seasons in program history since the legendary 1980s teams, be sure to follow along on at Rhody Football Front Office on YouTube and TikTok. Become a member of the Friends of Football by reaching out to the front office personnel, Jeff Rosencroft and Mason Smoller, to get involved.
As we know, it's been quite some time since your Rhode Island Rams have made the postseason. In fact, they haven't made it since 1985. So why don't we throw it back and take a look at what the playoff bracket looked like way back then?
Yeah, that year Rhode Island won the Yankee Conference with 10-3 overall record while going 5-0 in Yankee play. At that time, the Yankee Conference did include URI, UMass, New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, and Boston University. The field was made up of 16 teams ranked with home field advantage: Middle Tennessee, Nevada, Furman, Northern Iowa, Eastern Washington, and Rhode Island, which was ranked 7 at the time, as well as Arkansas State and Georgia Southern. And at large, we did have Jackson State, Idaho, Akron, and Grambling State.
In the first round, the Rhode Island Rams faced off against Akron, winning 35-27. It was the last time a playoff game had been played in Kingston, Rhode Island, and it was led by head coach Bob Griffin. Unfortunately, the Rams fell to Furman in the second round, who was ranked 3rd in the playoffs, as Furman went on to lose in the championship game 44-42 against Georgia Southern in an upset. Of these teams, here's where they stand today. At the FBS level, we have Middle Tennessee, Nevada, Arkansas State, Akron, and Georgia Southern. And in the FCS level, we have Northern Iowa, Furman, URI, Grambling State, Eastern Washington, Idaho, and Jackson State.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see where all those teams have, gone at this point, and it's important to note, in my opinion at least, that HBCUs don't actually compete in the postseason anymore, which is interesting to me because the first ever FCS playoffs way back in 1978 was won by Florida A&M, an HBCU themselves. I believe they're the only ones maybe to win the championship as an HBCU. So Jackson State, Grambling State, two schools you won't see in the postseason anymore. Northern Iowa having a pretty awful year. I think they're like 2-7, something like that. But usually they're a mainstay of the FCS playoffs. Furman, kind of the same situation, a pretty mainstay program in the FCS postseason. Eastern Washington as well. Idaho, too. They made, at one point, Idaho actually was an FBS school. They're the only FBS team to willingly move down to FCS since these two divisions have been created. So interesting that almost every school from that postseason way back in 1985 has had a very interesting path since then. As for Rhode Island, you can't really say the same, but hey, who knows after this year and with the current changing landscape of college sports, who knows, right? It could be a totally different story, 30 years from now. So, with your Rhode Island Rams heading down to Delaware this weekend to take on the Delaware Fighting Blue Hens, why don't we toss it to our desk to break it down, their schedule so far this season.
Yeah, so the Delaware Blue Hens are well rested coming off of a bye week, having beaten Albany 28-14 in their last outing on October 26th. The Blue Hens are 7-1 overall with a 4-1 conference record, having beaten Bryant, who URI will be playing soon, NCA&T, University of Pennsylvania, Sacred Heart, Monmouth, Maine, and Albany. I'm not going to lie, that's a pretty weak schedule coming from the Blue Hens. I think URI has had a much tougher schedule so far. They have not played an FBS opponent. I mean, obviously we went on and played Minnesota, so I think that's just a crazy comparison from the Blue Hens to URI. Very different schedule, very different kind of player performance for sure.
Yeah, Rhode Island's going to come into this one a lot. Not that Rhode Island has their own tough schedule. I think we've seen that sort of reflected in the media poll. Clearly, Rhode Island's it's only top 50. It's like between 40 and 50. So Rhode Island, we don't want to talk too down on Delaware and their schedule, but you're right, Emily. They chose this season to not take on an FBS opponent, and because the CAA now sits at 16 schools, there's a lot of wiggle room to get away with not playing a lot of difficult opponents, and that's sort of the way it's been so far this season for Delaware. So, while Rhode Island hasn't played the toughest schedule, they've had their challenges, like UMaine, like UNH, and like Minnesota. Delaware, they can't say the same.
Yeah.
The Blue Hens do have one loss on their season to Richmond, 28-9. Richmond dominated in the ground game and prevented Delaware from getting anything going, forcing Delaware to pass to try and beat them. The only games remaining for the Blue Hens include home against Campbell, which Rhode Island did beat earlier this season, and then at Villanova in their season finale. The Blue Hens do average 36 points per game while holding opponents just under 19 points per game, as well as a pass-run split at 50-50, but the Blue Hens look to establish run early and often. Delaware averages 436 yards per game with 40 offensive touchdowns on the year while giving up just 20 offensive touchdowns to their opposition.
Alexa, you said a lot of really good things about this Delaware team, and it makes sense. They're going to jump up to Conference USA next year, 20 extra scholarship players on the roster this year, but they also do what you could call the little things the right way, right? They have a very favorable turnover margin. That's something that Rhode Island has struggled with this season. Delaware is really efficient in the red zone, and it's not that Rhode Island is not, but we have seen Rhode Island make a couple of bad turnovers, you could say, in plus territory, sometimes even in the red zone. Delaware tends to force their opponent to pass the ball because of their strong run defense, giving up similar yards to Rhode Island, just 3.3 yards a run. So both of these teams with very stout run defenses. So this one, either one team's going to find a way to break through with their ground game, or both teams are going to have to find a way to get it done through the air. With both of these teams featuring absolutely fantastic run defenses, one of these two teams will have to find a way to get it done through the air. For Delaware, it's been three guys doing the job of one, right? So 22 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a completion percentage just shy of 60. Not fantastic, but not awful. And they're averaging about 270 passing yards per game. So it's been Ryan O'Connor, it's been Zach Marker, and Nick Minchucci. Minchucci started the last game against Albany, so it'll be interesting which one of those three guys trots out under center to get this one started for Delaware. It's kind of fascinating to me that a team can be so great offensively, so great this season, and still not really have a decided quarterback. Obviously, we knew where Rhode Island was earlier in the year with that, but Delaware,
we've moved on.
Yeah, we've moved on.
We've moved on from the multiple quarterbacks.
Yeah. 3 quarterbacks, though, is crazy.
3 is crazy.
Delaware,
we could barely do it with 2.
Yeah.
Delaware, on the other hand, they haven't moved on.
Yeah.
In the run game, though, it's not a big deal when it's multiple guys getting it done. And for them, it's been Marcus Yarns sort of leading the way, 436 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, averaging 6 yards a carry, which is pretty great. Jonathan Silver has been good as well, 382 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. Also over 6 yards a carry. So these guys at any moment can gash your running defense. So it's pretty good that Rhode Island has shown that they have a really stout unit this season. As for the wide receivers, it's Phil Lutz leading the way for Delaware. 32 receptions on 652 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns on the year, and over 20 yards per reception. So clearly a big play threat is Lutz. They have 8 players with over 100 receiving yards. So those 3 quarterbacks, they know how to dish it out. So even with that kind of revolving door at that position, Delaware's still getting it done. So it'll be interesting to see on Saturday who will it be under center for the Blue Hens.
And on the opposite side of the ball, pass rushers Melkart Abu Joud and Keyshawn Hunter combined for 10.5 sacks, as well as Gavin Moole. He leads the team with 52 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 1 interception, 1 forced fumble as well. And we also have KT Say with 4 interceptions on the season. And overall, as a team, they have 4 blocked field goals, which we did see this weekend from Rhode Island having 1 blocked. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Thank you all for tuning in to today's episode of Rhody Beat Report. This is Alexa Baker, joined here by Justin Therio and Emily Lanzarone. Tune in next week as the Rams return home to Kingston for Senior Day and their regular season home finale against the UAlbany Great Danes.